Today's speaker is Jeremy Rowe from New York City. He will be presenting on record prices for cartes postales and real photo postcards, offering a fascinating look into a side of the hobby that many of us may not be familiar with. Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing this program with us today.
I want to thank Hal and Alan and the Wichita Postcard Club for inviting me to do the presentation. This is going to be sort of an eclectic trip through some real photo postcards and postcards that you may not have seen. I'm a collector. I collect and focus on the image, not the value. I look at aesthetics. I look at content. I look at how it fits my collection, historic importance, a variety of things like that. But people, in talking to some folks a while back, we started talking about monetary value and what makes a postcard worth money, why are things being driven, how is the raising price of postcards like real photo postcards changed the market and impacted the market and bringing new material out. So I put something together sort of noodling around about that. Real photo postcards have become recognized as collectibles very heavily over the last 20 years or so. Prior to that, it was primarily print cards and artist signed cards. Here's an example of one of the cards that got a lot of play in 2005 for being a record price at the time, $12,650 for the Waverly Cycle card with the Alphonse Mucha image on it. This was touted in Antique Trader and a variety of the magazines at the time as the world record price for a postcard. Pretty significant price at the time. Another one about that era, this was the original art and one of the cards from a Samuel Schmucker card that sold at Jackson's International Auction for $12,075 about that same time. Some other cards that bring a lot of money, not real photo postcards, but have been fairly impactful in the market, are cards like this one sent from the White Star Line with the postmark from the Titanic that went for $25,000 in 2012. And then this one was in the Guinness Book of Records, the one that's been touted as the most expensive postcard ever sold at auction, sold for $45,370 in March 2002. It's a vintage 1840 card that was apparently made by the individual and sent through the mail, the first official postcard according to them. I focus on real photo postcards. These are examples. This is an X-ray lab at Battle Creek, Michigan, showing the way that they used to do X-rays with the meters and the tubes placed on the people with no protection at all. A great example of something that you tend not to think about until you see the photograph. Once you see the photograph, it tells a story. There's an X-ray in the lower corner. There are people doing work. You can see the equipment. Just sort of a fun piece. That's what excites me about the real photo postcards. I thought I'd give a little background on how they're made for you. These are some examples of the types of cameras that were used. Upper left is a Brownie. There were folding Kodaks. There were a variety of European clap and folding cameras. Cameras like the one in the lower right-hand corner, the Graflex 3A. They range from being amateur cameras with fairly inexpensive lenses that were not always sharp to things like the Graflex 3A that were just spectacular, very, very crisp and very, very sharp. They all created a postcard-sized negative, which is the same size as the postcard, contact printed, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the images are very, very sharp if they are sharply focused to begin with. There are many different types of paper. This is an ad for Psycho paper, and it has pricing on one side. It also has a tipped-on example of one of the photographs using their paper to sell and show. If you're into real photo postcard, the row at the top, the stamp boxes, trying to figure out, using the stamp box to figure out what type of paper it is, using Playel and some of the other resources to try and identify dates, times that were made. The images on the bottom are the envelopes or the boxes that the postcard paper came in to give you an idea of what the range of papers were. There were high contrast papers, glossy papers, matte contrast papers, colored papers, very, very broad range. Mike Viney did an article on the Kodak Velox postcards that was sent out with the Wichita Note earlier. Really great article to take a look at to get an idea. Two different types of paper. One is called printing out paper. One's called developing out paper. This is printing out paper. This was done by either gaslight or light, sunlight outside. You would take the piece of paper, put the negative on top, put in a contact printing frame, and expose it to light. You would print it until the image was as dark as you wanted it, then take it out, fix it, wash it, and it would be done. But it was printing out paper. You would actually see the density of the image as it worked its way through, so you could print it as dark or light as you would like it. Variety of different paper formats in that style. A little bit later, they came up with developing out paper. These are the negatives that were used. An example of a Kodak machine on the left with the tank with the negatives for people processing at home. They could process at home, or you could drop it off at a local processor. In Arizona, where I've done work, there were homes that would do their own processing, drugstores, photographers, a variety of places to have it done. The lower right has the back of a postcard camera at the right of that image, and you can see the girls agitating the chemistry for the postcard negative. This is an example of a typical home system. Photographer making real photo postcards by gaslight. You can see a light there with the bulb, chemistry, contact printing frame, little tank for processing, his reference guides and materials on the top, and a pocket watch that's open so it can time the exposure. This is an example of a developing out paper. Developing out paper, you created a latent image on the paper. You would expose it in light, but you wouldn't actually see it until you developed it. You had to put it in a developer to bring the image out. Then you would fix it and process it from there. Developing out paper tended to have a little bit broader range of contrast in paper surfaces and tonality. It also tended to be less expensive for individuals that were doing work in places like Europe after World War I, where paper was very expensive. They would do contact prints as opposed to enlargements, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The silver content of this paper was very, very high, and they got incredibly rich blacks and incredibly rich tonal ranges, which is why many fine art photographers wind up using it, which we'll be talking about in a few moments. You could also tone it. You could process the paper and then use a gold tone or other toning to give some additional color to it. That's why there's a range of sort of cool to warm papers in real photo postcards that you see over time. Another real photo variant is this autographic camera developed by Henry Gaisman. It actually had a trap door on the back, and between the paper that protected the film from light and the film underneath it, there was a layer of carbon paper. The trap door allowed you to write on the paper that would press the material onto the negative, and when processed, it would not show. So when you printed it, you would get a white signature on the card. The one on the left is an example of a Kodak autographic card that Roscoe Arbuckle signed when he was doing entertaining the troops on the Mexican border. You find these occasionally. Anytime you see that writing on the side, the likelihood is that that's a Kodak autographic camera. Another idea about how unique that image is, how it was produced, and a little of the story behind it, that someone would use an autographic camera as opposed to another format camera. Here's an example of someone doing an enlargement, but basically showing an enlarger in a developing out paper situation where people would use an enlarger or a light source to expose the image, process it, print and make the print, develop out the image to be able to see it, and then work your way through from there. Real photo postcards tended to fall in the quarter and dollar boxes until the 90s. There really weren't a lot of people that were collecting it. There were a few pioneers that collected during that earlier period. In 1981, Hal Morgan and Andreas Brown put together Prairie Fires and Paper Moons, which was sort of my Bible for a long time. It was a great book that sort of kicked off seeing amazing real photo postcards that rarely you saw otherwise. Before that time, it was very rare to find people crediting postcards as a source in history books or in anytime they were reproduced in documentaries or others. Many of the images came from postcards, but nobody knew they came from postcards. They were never credited or cited as being from postcards. About this time, people started paying attention to the format as well, and understanding that things like the stamp box and other information on the card helps you research and find more information about the image on the card. Postmarks, the messages that are put on the card, all that ties into it. These are an example of sort of a scatter shot of some of the books that were produced about that era and slightly later. Luke Sant's book on folk photography that looked at real photo postcards, The Unbelievable Images, Adirondack postcards, my Arizona postcard book, Bob Bogdan's real photo postcard book, rural delivery, and then more recently the real photo postcards from the Changing Nation at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It shows sort of the arc recognition of real photo postcards and interest in them as a topic in an area. When we were talking ahead of time, we were talking a little bit about the history of antique trader and postcard collector, going through the listings in the publications as they came out, doing mail order, doing telephone auctions, all the things of that sort. There were auctions like Lynn Knight's auction, which is a book with several thousand individual cards and groups of cards that came out. One of my favorites, and one of the ones that really had a strong impact on me and that I still use for reference, is Antique Paper Guild, which was done by Bob Ward out of Seattle. They started with monthly or maybe bi-monthly auctions that they would have, and there were two major collectors. There was that were collecting real photo postcards, primarily cards like the social history cards. There's Bruce Nelson in Maine and then Joel Wayne in California. This was one of the areas that they would compete for cards. They would get the auctions, they would compete for cards. They would raise the prices up. As the prices got higher and higher, more and more people would consign material to the auction. It started this sort of priming the pump, basically, for getting material in. These were produced in 250 or 500 runs. They're great reference books. They show the greatest hits from the auctions that Bob Ward did, and some pricing information, but just to get an idea of what's out there. If you're collecting something, knowing what's out there, knowing what's been out there before is really important. You start looking at prices of some of the cards and the cards that were hitting higher prices in collectibles. This is one that sort of set an early record, Postcards International auction in 1993. Social history was one of the topics that was really hot at that point. This is a caravan wagon for the Socialist Party, sold for $3,600 in 1993. This was cited by Bob Ward as the highest price ever for a real photo postcard in his publications that he was doing at the time. This is one that sold 1999. It's a photograph of the C.S. Fly studio in Tombstone burning, taken by Mrs. Fly as she ran to look at her life's work and her husband's life work going up in smoke. This sold at auction for $2,450 in 1999. These are out of Lynn Knight's. I don't have access to the cards, unfortunately, but I reproduced them. Hopefully you can see enough to be able to be intelligible here. This is an A&W root beer card, root beer stand. And just to give you an idea of how the escalation was occurring at this point, they estimated this at $250 to $350 was the estimated value. It sold for $1,100 at that auction. This one's a shooting game or a toss game for a carnival, Swat the Kaiser, where you threw something and knocked the Kaisers over, World War I era. Again, estimated at $200 to $250, sold for $1,100 in 2007 at the Lynn Knight auction. This one's Eagle Theater, showing the broadsides for the movies, an early movie theater in Manhattan, estimated at $150 to $200, sold at $1,150 in 2008, the next year, in one of the big auctions there. And this one, women's suffrage, another key topic that was very hotly contested and desirable and started bringing great material out. A women's suffrage postcard, this sold in Lynn Knight's auction 2007, estimated at $350 to $450, sold for $3,800. Got quite a bit of attention. Another category that's interest is real photo postcards of tattoos and tattoo artists. This one sold for $1,700 at Bray's auction. It shows Ben Corday, who is a tattoo artist, with an example of his work, a woman that was heavily tattooed by Ben, real photo postcard. Another real photo postcard, this one's Charles Wagner, who was a New York City photographer, showing his own tattoos, his tattoo equipment, and a woman being tattooed. This sold for $47,000, an extra zero there, $4,750 at his auction in 2024. Another category that's really escalated and drawn a lot of interest and pulled a lot of material, a lot of research out has been baseball, particularly the Negro leagues, the African-American leagues. This is an image of the Clowns, which was an African-American baseball team that Bob Ward sold for $1,200 in 1993. Another example, this one shows a real photo postcard, but it shows what happens in baseball. Baseball cards are graded, and they put them in these little housings and have a grading for them so people can identify which are the better cards and follow some of the cards. They're usually graded and numbered. This one's a Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig card, a real photo postcard, and it sold for $10,800 in the fall of 2018 at auction. Another African American Negro League team, Judd Wilson from the Homestead Grays, a very famous team. If you look at condition on this, people would not consider this a super condition card with the crease and some of the damage on it, but it sold for $31,900 in 2006 because of the rarity, his autograph, and the fact that it's a rare African American baseball team that's very highly researched and sought. Another one, again, condition, you would not think of this as a very valuable card based on condition, staining, fading, and so on. It does have an autograph. This one sold for $81,200 over a $5,000 reserve at an auction because of the rarity and the value for the research and history about African American teams. Some were produced in higher volume. This is a card that there are a number of copies available. This is the Boston Red Sox. They were the 1915 championship team for the American League. This gives you sort of a run of how the prices have changed over time for these. Card sold for $9,400 in 2007. Another one, they started numbering them so you can follow the numbers and see which one sold and what condition went. But $26,600 in 2013 to $78,000 in 2017 to $84,000 in 2020, $75,000 in 2024 for another card, probably not quite in as good condition, and then $114,000 summer of 2024. Again, the same image, also to that, authenticated and credentialed by these organizations, and that raises the price pretty dramatically. One that you would not think of a composite card, not a real photo card, but with a lot of retouching. But because of the rarity and because of the collectability and the baseball market, this one's Hank Aaron before he was a Major League Baseball player. This is the Indianapolis Clowns, which is a small African American team, amateur team that he was in very young. This one's estimated at $5,000 to $10,000, sold for $170,000 in an auction in 2024. This one's not a real photo postcard, but this has the record of anything I was able to find in looking at prices. This is an autographed Lou Gehrig printed card, just a printed postcard, not a real photo card. It sold at auction at Christie's in 2021 for $687,500. The numbers are stratospheric and amazing. You can take away 2, sometimes 3 of the zeros and think about the normal postcard market at the postcard shows for some of these things. But these are the kind of values that are placed on some of these very, very narrow niche cards around the edges. Another piece is the philatelic side, postmarks, stamps, other sorts of things, the philatelic value of the cards on real photo postcards and non-real photo postcards. I've got one early flown postcard that has a early airmail postmark on it. It's a very desirable, very valuable card. These are printed cards, but they have the Vin Fizz stamp on them. The Vin Fizz was a plane. Cal Rogers flew from New York to California to try and win a bet. He flew a Wright Brothers airplane across to Chicago, down to Texas, across through Arizona to California, landed in Pasadena and broke his foot. Didn't complete it. He didn't make the time. He had to do it in a month to win the award, but he wanted to be able to travel all the way across. So he took off after he felt better, landed on the beach, crashed the plane, got entangled in the wreckage of the plane and died. There were only a few of these stamps that he put together. These were flown cards. So this stamp means that he took it on the airplane with him from one place to another and then put it in the mail. Very, very valuable stamps that show up very rarely, but this one sold for $88,000 at Siegel auctions. One of these showed up on eBay years ago that got a lot of attention. This is another one on a printed card, not a real photo card. There's a real photo version of this, but there's a printed card. Another sold for $112,100 at the same philatelic auction in 2023. Another philatelic one. This one's not even a real photo card, but just to give you an idea, this one has a misprint of the stamp that was on the printed card. It's a 2-cent stamp as opposed to a 1-cent stamp, a variant that was printed and got out, like the inverted airmail and some of the other rarities, $109,250 at one of the philatelic auctions. Oh, sorry, this was a private sale in 2020. Art cards, cards that have been modified by artists or artist cards. That's another category that seems to be very, very hot right now. This one's an Alexander Calder. He took a very plain card, real photo postcard, and did some artwork on the card that raised it from being a 25-cent card or a dollar card to being a $4,000 card at auction. Some of these art cards and artist sign cards are highly valuable. I'll show you some of the more valuable photo cards by the fine art photographers in just a moment. This one's a piece by Ellsworth Kelly, an artist doing an abstract expressionist painting on a postcard, a very small painting. This one sold for $5,000 in 2019. This one's a Jean-Michel Basquiat postcard that he painted on the postcard. The postcard sold for $30,000 at auction because it's a Basquiat and his paintings are bringing huge money at auction. Another card, just a fairly mundane card, but on the back is a sketch by Pablo Picasso that was sent through the mail. This brought $250,000, $251,000 at auction as a Picasso piece, not as a postcard. But again, the kind of thing that could have popped up in anybody's postcard collection or postcard group. Getting back to the real photo cards, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fine art cards. Fine art photographers that did real photo postcards are printed on carte postale paper because of the quality of the paper, the quality, the density of the prints, and in some cases because of the economics of printing small. Their negatives were this size. They could enlarge them, but they could also contact print them. And there are small numbers of these cards that are very, very highly sought after that are bringing amazing money right now. This one is Lotta Jacobi, famous photographer, European photographer. The photograph for 1909, but she printed it on postcard stock later. Because it's on postcard stock later, it doesn't bring the same value of the vintage prints, but this one sold for $1,300 in 2022, and one sold on Thursday for $750 that had a crease in it. So examples of those cards. These are on later stock. They're not on the carte postale stock. So this is like the George Eastman, the later postcard stock. Another later postcard stock image. This one's David Smith, a very famous sculptor and painter, American sculptor and painter. This is a card that he put together to show off some of his sculptures for an exhibition. You can see he wrote on the negative with black India ink and it printed white on the card. This one sold for just under $5,000, $4,700 in 2021 as a real photo postcard at one of the fine art auctions. Association with David Smith rather than association as a postcard. Another one, this is a Francesca Woodman. She was a graduate student at this point, a very famous and highly sought photographer, fine art photographer now. 1977 and 78, she did an exhibition in Rome. And this is a real photo postcard that she printed up and gave out as an invitation to her show in Rome. This one sold for $15,000 in 2025. This is the Society Anime. This is a series of postcards that were done of abstract and modern art. Catherine Drouet, Man Ray, and Michel Duchamp put together a museum in 1920 in New York City and started showing modern art. They did a series of postcards that illustrated some of the art that they were showing and made series of these. These are very interesting cards, highly sought after collectibles, building the set. This is a group that sold in 2022. At Swan, the card sold for $16,800, about $3,700 a piece. Prices are all over the place on these, as is the quality. I thought I'd show you two. You can see the difference in the quality between these two prints. One on the right is much higher, much more contrasty, much brighter, darker blacks. Highlights stand out better. The one on the left is much lighter print, whether it's printed light at the beginning or fading, but condition makes a big difference in the cards that you see, in the desirability of the cards and in the value of the cards. This is one of the other cards, the highest priced card from that series. This is a Man Ray photograph of a Marcel Duchamp painting listed as part of that series. This one sold for $17,500 in 2016 at Sotheby's. The prices for these are all over the place, and you never can tell whether it's an art collector that has never seen these before and is paying a very high price to have it as a collateral piece to go with the painting or print or other thing that they have, or whether it's someone collecting this in and of itself for that reason. So You take all of these with a grain of salt, but just give an idea of the kind of things that are coming up. This one's a Jean Cocteau portrait that was made of a wire sculpture printed on by Man Ray on a carte postale paper. This one sold for $51,200 as a Man Ray carte postale. Another Man Ray, this is a tableau that he did, a little piece with his blind stamp on the back. A sketch of Adam and Eve with Marcel Duchamp as the Adam. This one sold for 60,000 euros, about $70,000 in 2021. Just a quick note about these. A number of these cards are also reproduced and are made in later reprints. There are many, many copies of some of these later reprints. There's a huge difference between the originals and the reprints and the knockoffs that people do. So understanding and knowing what you're looking at is very, very important in these. This one's a photogram. In history of photography, where you're taking a photo course, photograms are where you take a piece of photographic paper and put objects on the paper, and you take light and put the light around that, and the light exposes through the object onto the paper and makes these sort of shadowy images called photograms. Each one is unique. This is a photogram that a very famous modern photographer, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, produced on postcard stock paper. So it's a one-off, unique Laszlo Moholy-Nagy print. This one sold initially at Sotheby's for $228,000 and then sold for $317,000 more recently in 2014. No, it's the same image, the same print, because there is only one. There are not multiple copies of this. One of the guys that sort of knocks me out, a modern photographer that did a lot of work in carte postale format, has had a couple of carte postale exhibitions in Chicago. There's a book, some great material about him. André Cortège. These are examples of self-portraits that he did. So you can see Cortège behind the camera. The one on the left is a carte postale self-portrait he did with friends in a mirror. You can see the camera that he's using, kind of self-portrait, typical self-portrait. The one on the right, starting in the 1930s, he started using funhouse mirrors to distort and did a series of distorted nudes and a variety of other distorted portraits that are very highly sought. But this is an example of him doing a self-portrait in that format. He was a very active photographer before World War I, during World War I, and after, commercial photographer, but he did not have much money. So a lot of the work he did, he would do carte postales as sample prints. In some cases, there are maybe a half a dozen, maybe a few more at the most, copies of these images. Many others are unique. Very, very highly sought after and recognized because of the exhibition and because of the others. So André Cortège carte postales tend to be very highly sought after and very highly competed for when they show up at auction. These are an example of the kinds of paper he used. The range of European papers, very similar to the Velox and the DuPont papers and the other papers we had here. Again, very similar types of papers, pebble surface, matte surface, gloss surface, different tonalities, different things you could use, and the kinds of cameras that he used. Typically, the cameras at the time were producing things on glass plates for the better quality cameras, and then the roll film for cameras like the Kodak Photographic and some of the other cameras. This is one of his carte postales. He was also interested because even though the carte postale is very small compared to the normal prints that he was doing, he would actually crop in and make images 1.5 inches or 2 inches on the carte postale paper and have these very, very tiny photographs on the carte postale paper as his end product. This is a self-portrait that he did called Self-Portrait Still Life with a Vase and Book. This sold for $50,000 in 2011 as an original André Cortège photograph. Another one that has gotten a lot of attention in abstract. This one's cropped to just a little over 2 15/16, almost 3 inches by 3.5 inches. Carte postale paper and then trimmed to that size as the end product for the photograph. This was sold at Christie's in '96 for $80,000. That was one of the numbers that started putting Cortège and Postcards on the map for fine art photographers in 1996. That was a very high price at that point, very competitive, and actually more than his prints were bringing at that time. This one's called Nature Mort. It's a portrait of Mondrian's glasses and his pipe that was shot at Chez Mondrian when Cortège was visiting Mondrian. Sold for $121,000 in 1991. That was to a museum that put him on the map initially, slightly earlier again, but these prices made the museums and the collectors market start to pay attention to these and start looking for them, which pulled more out of the woodwork. After this point, collectors and museum curators went and visited Kurtesh at his house in New York, and they found in his house he was using original carte postales for bookmarks in books. He had them in little piles. A couple of drawers had a little stack that he put in an envelope and was waving it over his head because he was upset that he hadn't been recognized and making money for his prints the way he thought he should. So he was waving it and offering to the curators for $1 million for the envelope of real photo postcards at the time. There are great stories about how these things work out and some of the relationship between the photographers and the carte postale material and the curators in the market that come in. In 1997, 6 years later, sold for $376,000 and $500. It was the second highest price for any photograph at the time, more than any Ansel Adams, any Weston, any daguerreotype, any other photograph at the time. It was a second highest price of any photograph that had been sold at auction at that point. Another example of a very tightly cropped abstract image that Kurtesh did is a string quartet from 1926, sold for $197,000 in 2014. This also shows that they don't always go up. This is a unique image, sold for $86,000 in 1996. Came on the market again in 2017 and sold for $5,250. It's a very fickle market, a very specific market. It depends on individual collectors' desires and interests and the zeitgeist of the time, what's out there. This one is a Chez Mondrian. It's one of Kurtesh's most famous prints. This was done in the hundreds, if not thousands, of prints as 8x10s, 1620s, 2024s, thousands, scores and scores of these prints. There are only a handful of the carte postale. So the carte postale postcard images bring more money than his other prints, than the larger fine art prints. Vintage prints, in particular, much more so than the contemporary prints. This one sold in 1992 for $150,000 and was traded a few days later at $250,000 to a private sale. That was 3 times the record of any Kurtesh image of any size. So the carte postale was the record price for that artist of any format work that he did, because of its rarity and because of the quality of the work that he did in the postcard format because of the paper. Another copy of this was estimated at $400,000 to $600,000 and sold for $464,000 at the Metropolitan Museum, at the Sotheby's auction. I'm using an example from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, same image, but not the same card. This one is the highest price that's surfaced recently of any of the Kurtesh images. It's a really wonderful abstract of the character posed in the studio with the sculpture in the back sort of mirroring the shapes, and just a fantastic photograph. This one sold for $445,000 in 2008, and then a copy, whether it's the same copy or not, we don't know at this point, for $567,000 at Christie's in 2024. As far as I know, at auction price right now, from the research I've done, this is the highest price real photographic postcard that is sold to date. It shows the range of dates again. There are, however, other Kurtesh cards that are out there in private hands. This is one example. There are several cards that are rumored to be offered right now for $1 million and above for a single Kurtesh card. All of these cards have provenance. They all know which collectors they came from, which collections they came from. There's a elaborate trail for material that goes at this level, but this is an idea for you of what's out there and some of the images that bring that. I'm going to bring you back to reality a little bit now, just general real photo postcards. These are the ones that sort of capture my heart. The more obtainable kind of things that you find, these are examples of photographers at work that I've collected just to show, those are the things that are near and dear to my heart. Using these for research, using them for examples of work, using them for illustrations in books and publications. That's what's really important to me, and I think what's important to most of the collectors. The dealers that are here are pulling things out of the woodwork and helping price them, move them on, and get them into the hands of collectors that can do things with them. Researchers are finally realizing that these are primary source documents. They've got information on them that is really important. And they're some of the best documentation of life in America and life worldwide from 1900 to 1920, 1925 for the really golden era of real photo postcards, and all the way up from there. Some cards like this in the Metropolis series were produced in quantity. They're still fairly unusual and bring fairly significant prices, but they're just wonderful classic cards. And you find thousands of topics, millions of cards in real photo postcard format that are great and wonderful. Some cards raise questions. This is one that I picked up from Ray, Arizona. It's about the time period when modern art was being done in the late teens, early 20s. Whether this is an art card that was specifically shot and composed to be able to do it this way, whether it's a double exposure that he accidentally shot. I have another copy of the card that's not a double exposure, and it's printed differently. Some of the negatives are slightly larger and slightly smaller. The fact that it's printed so perfectly to make this wonderful image makes me feel that it's something that he did consciously on purpose, and that makes it unique to me and just really a special card. But these are the kind of quirks that make a real photo postcard more interesting to some people and help drive the market. And the prices of the cards are what pull things like this out of closets, attics, collections, and so on to get them available for people to be able to do the work and research. Another favorite card, just an example of cards that you collect for the genre, the content, and so on. This is Chuck Wallace Slim the Rockologist. I'm working on an article about this that'll be out shortly. He carried a diorama in the back. He was a missionary and did proselytizing and used the Rockologist and his diorama as a technique to get people to listen to him for his talks. He had longhorn steer horns on the front of the car and would drive around California, Arizona, and others selling Indian artifacts, Indian curios, and examples of rocks. In the 1940s, he had a long trailer and a car and would drive around. I actually, as a child, ran into him in Prescott, Arizona, and wound up buying a rock from him when I was a kid because he was still active at that point. Great story, great guy. So I'll have an article about it that out at some point soon. This is the end of my wild and crazy tour through real photo postcards for you. The one on the left is another favorite image of somebody who's using a camera that has a ground glass in the back to focus, trying to shoot something. So he used his coat as a dart cloth. So you get the Cyclops photographer on one side. The one on the other side is a Mexican photographer and cinematographer. It's a composite self-portrait that he did. So he's looking down at himself with a hand-crank movie camera, making a movie of himself on top of the derby hat. And it's got his blind stamp, Robert Turnbull. Anyway, that's what I have for the good of the cause. Look forward to any questions or comments. Definitely eclectic view, and please don't focus just on the value. Focus on the intellectual impact and importance of the cards for research, for your excitement and enjoyment as aesthetic objects, and so on from there. But the values give you an idea of what's been sort of driving the market and helping pull some of the things out. So anyway, that's all I got for you. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you. Look forward to questions and comments.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm just breathless once again. I did have a preview of part of this earlier, and I think back about my own family and how one of our homes in the 1950s cost $35,000. It's just so amazing.
Again, don't focus on the values are there for another reason, but the values are part of it. They tell a story about how and why people have gone after these things and why they're important. We all like them, not just for the value, for all the other components of it, but
of course,
another way to look at it. Okay.
That's great. That's great.
The first one was, I think, from you about the Velox postcard paper that you sent out previously that was done on Velox paper. We'll get the link for that. It was a link that you sent me that I got about the Velox paper that Mike Viney did.
Oh, okay.
So that's a great reference and a great article, great piece. We need to get that out to people.
Bill, can you talk about the comments?
Yes, so I actually start with your comment at the very beginning where you said, please call us again about the article on the Velox postcard paper. Where is that available?
I just mentioned that's a link that actually Hal and the Wichita Club sent to me. So we'll get the link out and get it to people. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's a
Thank you.
piece of paper that he did. It was great.
Dennis McBurney asks, did you sell copies of your book? I'd love to get a copy of your Arizona Real Photo Postcards history and portfolio.
I've got copies available if you want to drop me an email. They're available online as well. My publisher was not super broad. There's still some copies left. There's both the hardbound and a soft. There's a couple of hardbound left, but most of them are softbound at this point.
All right. I'll email you again.
Okay, the only other comment on the deck is from Dolores Rowe, who said that very interesting, excellent. Your knowledge is Jeopardy ready.
Oh, thank you.
Too much information, Dolores.
I didn't mean to be a fire hose and overload things, but hopefully it was okay.
It was terrific.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Jeremy, is this in a pipeline for publication at any point, this talk?
I'm working on it.
You know, it's really, really an important contribution. It's just amazing. And also it's so interesting, the sort of dichotomy between what we consider postcard collectors and this entirely different market that might have 10 cards in their collection and have a couple $1 million spent. It's such a unique market, to particularly just let me, I have so many things in my mind. One of the things that I wonder, have you run into, you probably have, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Thomas L. Sasser, researcher.
No, that doesn't ring a bell off the top. I'd love a contact if you got it.
Elsasser. He talks about the use of photo postcards documenting architecture and why architects should favor it. He's a European researcher, and it's a interesting perspective.
Another niche. Yeah.
Sign off for a second and come up with something else.
I find it was very well organized, and you look at the historical and cultural issues of the photographs they just speak volumes about time at the time they were taken and the people that were involved, and you'd like to ask them a question.
Mm-hmm. I talk about postcards and photographs in particular, but postcards specifically about them being primary source documents. They are direct connections, whether it's a photograph, whether it's the photograph and the writing on the back, whether it's the photograph writing and the postmark, whatever is going along with that. They tell a story, and there's a story embedded there. You need to understand a little bit about photography to understand that part. You can research and read about it. You can look at who it's written to and research that person. Sometimes you have a date and a time that you can tie together. One thing that's interesting for a researcher that I stumbled on and then realized that it's confusing is people also go through various periods of time in the 1940s, 1960s, and 70s where they would find grandma and grandpa's real photo postcards and send them to somebody. So you get a 1910 or 1920 postcard with a 1960 or 1970 postmark. That throws you off. And in some cases, there are postcards from the 1900 to 1905 or 10